participating virtually in this weekly update. I'd like to begin just with some internal housekeeping in terms of the schedule that we are developing on our communications side during the COVID-19 response. I think all of us probably took, a couple days, if not weeks, to sort of get our sea legs about us in terms of how we're going to be communicating with the public. You have the operation going on at the EOC. You have those primarily health-related updates. But we, and I said this last week, have gotten to the point where we think there's enough going on with the city and the operations of city government that we need to find a structured way to communicate that as well. What I think we're going to do is once a week, the Wednesdays with Wade conversation with the public that we did yesterday, we'll probably, for the time being, continue to make that a weekly event. And we see that as an opportunity for the citizens to be able to ask questions directly to their public officials. And then at least once a week, and we're thinking that this normal time slot, Thursday at 10 a.m., may be a natural time for an update news conference of the sort we're doing now. So generally speaking, Wednesday afternoons, we will be live on the internet, giving citizens a chance to ask questions. And then the next day, Thursday morning, we'll have opportunities like this for the media to ask questions. Not a perfect plan, not saying that won't change, but generally I think if you want to sort of build in an expectation, these media news conferences I envision would be happening once a week during roughly this time slot. I wanted to clarify that at the beginning because last week when we had our media news conference, we noticed in the comment section that there were citizens trying to ask questions. And last night during our Wednesdays with Wade, we noticed there were members of the media trying to ask questions. So what we just want to try to do is make Wednesdays an opportunity for the citizens to directly communicate and ask questions. And then these Thursday morning sessions will be our chance for the media to do the same. So just going forward, kind of pencil that in. This is not to say that Thursday mornings will be the only time we communicate with the media, quite the contrary. I think over 2+ years, if you've noticed anything about me personally, we're never bashful to accommodate interview requests that you may have. So as issues come up and you need access to city officials or me personally, clearly that's something we'll do at the drop of a hat. So it's not to say it's only going to happen Thursday mornings, but I think regularly we want to get in the habit of having this sort of a briefing. So today for this weekly briefing, we're joined digitally by Katie Crosby, who's the Chief of Staff of the city, Tom Scorbola, the Finance Director, and Tyrone Alexander, who is our Director of Human Resources. I don't know that they necessarily have any statements to make, but we wanted to make them available in the event that media may have questions about what we're announcing today. I may be able to answer those questions, but in the event that I can't, we'll have Katie, Ty, or Tom chime in and answer your questions. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected all of us in ways that we couldn't possibly have foreseen even 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. And that's not an exaggeration. It's obviously affected all of us personally and the way we spend our time, where we spend it, how we spend it. It's in some cases affected our health. It's affected businesses, social organizations, the economy, and it has affected organizations of all shapes and sizes, including the organization known as Toledo City Government. And what COVID-19 has done is negatively affected all of us in virtually all those ways. Sure, you can squint and maybe be optimistic that there could be a silver lining to some of the things that's happening right now. Maybe we can achieve a general sense of brotherhood and sisterhood that maybe Americans haven't had for a number of years. Maybe even by staying apart physically, we metaphorically can come together. I do believe that that's a possibility, and I hope it takes place, and that could be a positive of the situation we're going through. But short of that, well, just about everything that has happened to our country, our society, and our city over the last month or so has been pretty bad. It's been really tough. And today we want to update some of the ways that this crisis has affected the city of Toledo and some of the things we're doing to respond. Showing that there are interconnected supply chain realities that can have a negative impact on the city. One of the things, certainly not the most important thing I want to announce today, but one of the things I want to point out is that the new ozone treatment facility project at the Collins Park plant, it was to be completed by August 3rd of this year. As a result of this pandemic and a changing work schedule and the fact that the employees there are having to keep a social distance, and there are quite literally tools and other implements going into what they're constructing at the plant that can't be shared in the same way that they were shared in the past. The supply chain has been interrupted. A number of trickle-down effects have become realized to the point where now we know the contractor has told us that we're not going to meet that deadline. It will get done, but it's not going to get done on the schedule we wanted. Our water continues to be drinkable. I've said for a long time we don't have a drinking water problem in this community. We have a lake water problem. There's a difference, and the water that comes out of your faucet continues to be some of the best in the country. The ozone treatment facility is going to make that even more so the case, and it will. It's just not going to happen on the schedule we originally had hoped because of everything that has happened to our country and the unanticipated, often unpredictable result of a series of dominoes falling in exactly the wrong way all across the board. That probably is most demonstrated on the city of Toledo's budget, which will form the majority of the remainder of what I want to discuss today. It's been said a couple times over the last few weeks, but it bears repeating, that Toledo and all cities in Ohio are unique in this country, unique in that we are funded primarily through a payroll income tax. I think about 71% of all revenues that come into the city of Toledo come in through a payroll income tax. We don't know it any other way. It's always been that way. And in fact, every other city in the state is funded the same way, and so that feels normal to us. Actually, when you look around the country and see how other cities are funded, it's very rare to be funded by a payroll income tax. Most other cities in this country are funded by a sales tax or a property tax. Typically, this doesn't matter. This is a distinction that's not worth highlighting normally. But when we enter a world where government officials, from the President of the United States down to the governor and others, literally say to the citizens of this country, stay at home and don't go to work, well, then being funded by an income tax is not ideal, to put it mildly. In fact, the Brookings Institute about 2 weeks ago came out with a national report that listed every city in the country, everyone, sea to shining sea, on a ranking of the cities most negatively affected by the COVID-19 crisis. Of all the cities in our country, from Alaska to Maine, the top 5 most negatively affected cities were all in Ohio. Toledo was number 4. I think Cincinnati was the most negatively affected. Columbus was second. Third was a city in Kentucky, I believe. Toledo was fourth, Cleveland was fifth. That's not an accident. It's not a coincidence. It's because the way Ohio funds its city government is based on an income tax. And right now, by design, because of what we've had to do to battle this virus, people are not working the way they were. Income is not being generated the way it was. It's a reality. It's not something anyone caused. It's no one's fault. We don't want to be in this position. We didn't do anything to be in this position, but it happened. And we have to adapt to it and react to it. We are now in a recession, and that's not a recession is something that can be mathematically, objectively defined. It's not someone's opinion. It's not a, political phrase of spin. It is something that has a definition. A recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth. Well, the first quarter in the United States saw negative economic growth. And while the second quarter hasn't ended, there will be record-setting negative economic growth. Some economists believe that the economy may shrink by 30%. So there's no question. It's not an opinion. It's just a fact. We are now in a recession. The longest period of uninterrupted job growth in the history of our nation is over. And we're back in a recession. Recessions happen at relatively regular intervals in our country's history, every 10 to 15 years or so. And so all of us knew that there would be a day when we'd be facing a recession. The fact that we're in a recession now is not a surprise. Everyone knew one would eventually come. But what is surprising is how quickly and unexpectedly it showed up at our front door. 5 weeks ago, when I say we, I'm in the city of Toledo, we were enjoying record high income tax collections, a record low unemployment, a momentum and energy that hadn't been seen maybe in a generation. And then with the flip of a switch, it all ended. And we went from a really strong, healthy economy to a recession like that. That's the reality. It's not just the reality for Toledo, it's the reality for Seattle and Denver and New Orleans and Miami and Boston and everyone in between. It typically, governments and organizations, businesses have a little time to prepare for this. They see the economic winds changing and they make adjustments. Metaphorically speaking, they trim the sails a little. They begin to adjust and make decisions to help prepare them for the economic downturn. No one had the chance to do that this time. And that is why all of us, especially cities in Ohio, because of the peculiar way we are funded, are facing immediate, unprecedented, and very real budget challenges. I've talked for a couple of years now about my public life and how, beginning as county treasurer, and certainly with 12 or 13 years I spent as county treasurer, the experience I have dealing with public budgets, I did feel that was one of the strengths I would bring to the mayor's office. And I would say that those experiences have served us well. I inherited a budget deficit. 2 years later, we had turned it into a budget surplus. And then, poof, that surplus turned into what we now know is somewhere between a $25 to $50 million deficit. That's tough and that's real. And you might say that's unfair. Well, sometimes life is unfair. No one's going to feel sorry for us. No one's going to make excuses for us. We just have to be accountable, and we have to make the tough decisions that leadership requires. Working with City Council, my administration, has turned a deficit into a surplus once before, so I know we can do it again. But to some extent, we've got to start all over. Didn't choose this path. Fate chose us. I know that we have a serious team in this administration that understands that citizens and families and businesses are having to make tough choices and do things that even a month ago they never could have imagined that they would be having to do. We need to do the same thing here in the city of Toledo. I am fortunate as mayor to have a team, not just in my administration with our finance department and our chief of staff and everyone, our entire executive team that takes this seriously, but also a city council that is committed to this as well. The budget task force has been meeting. We've briefed city council at every step of the way. I want to give us a special credit to Matt Cherry, the president of council, and then Chris Delaney and Katie Moline, who are the chairs of the budget task force committee. That's a good group. That's a good group of councilmen who take this seriously. One of the reasons I know that we will get through this, and dig out of the financial hole that fate has assigned to us, is because we have such a good team. Today, I want to announce one of the ways that we can dig out of this hole. There are a number of things that we can do and that we're going to need to do. A number of things we will do on the revenue side. There's the CARES Act, recently passed by Congress, is going to be a source of relief for us. We recently received a larger than typical amount from the Bureau of Workers' Compensation, for instance. There are, we have a budget stabilization fund that will be accessed, I'm sure, to some extent during this process. A lot of different options on the revenue side, and we're working with City Council to make sure we do that responsibly. But any effort to dig out of an unanticipated, historic $25 million hole, made more daunting by the fact that, again, a month ago, we were enjoying record high income tax collections. Any attempt to be serious about this has to involve cuts in our expenditures. And what that means for every organization, unfortunately, whether that organization is a business, a social service agency, or city government, is that payroll and personnel costs have to be a part of the equation. It's the single largest expenditure of any organization, any business, any company of any size, and certainly it's true in our organization. So one of the things that we have found that we are going to need to do, that we're announcing today, is that there will be 326 employees that are going to be put on temporary emergency leave. This is an act that no one is happy about, but as an indication of how we are funded, it's an act that other cities have already started doing. And frankly, in Toledo, we held out as long as we possibly could. We are now one of the last cities to move into our new reality. And so, whereas Cincinnati offered temporary emergency leave to 1,700 employees 2.5 weeks ago, and the week before that, I believe Akron and Dayton had about 600 each. We are now to the point where we need to join these other cities and make sure that we are living within our means at a time none of us anticipated. So in our organization, that means 326 employees. It's important to note that these are not layoffs. They are not. This is temporary emergency leave. This will be reevaluated every 30 days. And it is our hope and expectation that as the economy improves, as we pull ourselves out of this crisis as a country, we will be able to welcome these employees back into our organization. Personally, I look forward to that day where we will welcome these organizations, these individuals back into the organization, because they are wonderful men and women who work hard and who have done nothing wrong. They have done nothing other than serve the public with grace and dignity, and they want to continue to do that. And I know that there will be a day where they will be able to do that, and I look forward to that day. But for now, a temporary, with an emphasis on temporary, emergency leave is the only option with which we are left. We'll reevaluate every 30 days, and these 326 employees, it is worth noting, come from 3 different budgets that we have in the city. The highest profile, and I think the most easily understood by the citizens, is the general fund. That's clearly the largest and the area that has received the most focus, and the area where we see that $25 million deficit caused by the fact we're funded by an income tax. So yes, these positions are general fund positions. But there are also positions funded by our utilities department. One may ask, why do these employees face the need to have temporary emergency leave? They're not funded by an income tax. So though we have taken a massive hit in our revenues, shouldn't apply to this to this fund. True, they are not hurt by what's happened to our city on the income tax side. But among the many multifaceted negative effects that are happening here is the fact that the city of Toledo is not selling as much water, frankly, than it was recently, and doesn't plan to in the same volume that it had. We found about a 15% reduction in just the amount of water that we're providing to customers. When you have major customers like Jeep, that has sort of gone dark for this month, or our largest single customer, the Toledo Refining Company, to say nothing of BP, who is primarily a customer of Oregon, but they do get some water from us. There are just massive consumers of water who aren't consuming as much water and are not likely to do so long term. That and typical social distancing realities in our utilities department require that even those employees, some of them aren't even funded through our income tax, face this new reality. And our third fund, where these 326 employees work, is our SCM&R fund. That is funded primarily through the state gas tax. But there again, when you think about what's happening in this country, I think everyone's noticed the price of gas has gone down, and that is a good thing. But it's a supply and demand reality. People aren't driving as much. So to attract more sales, gas stations, of course, are lowering the price of gas. That's a reflection that people aren't moving around, they're not driving. It also means that the state gas tax is not providing the resources to the city that even 3 or 4 weeks ago we thought would be the case. So from these 3 major funds are these employees found. There are individuals affected in virtually every department of city government. There are employees in the Human Resources Department, Finance, Information Technology, Diversity and Inclusion, Neighborhoods, Law, Building Inspection, Plan Commission, the Mayor's Office. The Mayor's Office, it's, we understand that we have to be a part of the shared sacrifice that is occurring, and so there are individuals who work here who will be forced to take temporary emergency leave, and we will miss them as we will miss all 326 and welcome the day they can return. The Mayor's Office is a very big part of leading by example in this tough time. Public utilities, I've touched on, public service, fire and police, though I want to emphasize here, we are not talking about uniformed officers and firefighters. We're talking about civilian employees in those departments. And so while there are individuals in those departments affected, I would like to crucially emphasize that there are no uniformed officers in the police department, uniformed firefighters, paramedics in our employment who are affected by this. None whatsoever. These employees, since they are not being laid off, will continue to enjoy some benefits that they have as employees of the city of Toledo. They're going to continue to be able to receive health care. They're going to continue to be eligible for other benefits like tuition reimbursement, things of that nature that we continue to provide them. But generally speaking, these are employees who are going to be, filing for unemployment, and that's tough. That's tough for our organization. It's tough for these individuals. It's not something we wanted to do, frankly. Among the other cities in Ohio, we were among the last to get here because we just didn't want to lose the excellence, even for a temporary moment. We don't want to lose the excellence we have in our city departments. But like I said, sometimes life isn't fair. It's a reality that we face as a country. It's a reality that we face as a city. And I look forward to the day we can welcome these employees back. Today, these employees will be receiving their notice. In fact, it will occur by the end of the day. They'll receive communication either from their department director and then finally from the Human Resources Department itself. There are logistical sort of paperwork and IT realities that we have to tend to on a day like this. But what we're most concerned about is the welfare and dignity of our employees who have answered the bell and done everything that they were asked to do and are in this position not because of any decision they chose, but because fate chose us. And we will get through this, we will. But there are going to be tough days like today and tough weeks like today, where all Toledoans are going to have to make sacrifices, just like we're doing in our personal lives, just like businesses. Businesses are facing these exact same situation. That's why we went from record low unemployment a month ago to unemployment levels today that rival what we saw during the Great Depression. That just in the blink of an eye. That's the reality we face. And like all citizens and businesses in this community, we have to participate in moving forward. It was reported this morning, and it is true, that there will be no reduction in any service that we provide. Now let me say that again and clarify. There is no service that we offer, even with these temporary emergency leaves that we're offering today. There's no service that we provide that is going to be eliminated. None. But the services that we are going to provide, let's be honest, common sense will tell you that those services are going to be provided a little more slowly, a little less often than any one of us would want them to be. I used the example last night during our Wednesdays with Wade conversation, and I'll say it again. I think it's a great example. It's not the most important service we provide. It's just an example I think people can relate to. This weekend, again, a month ago, when we were living in a very different world, we had long anticipated that this weekend, middle of April, this weekend, we would send our crews out and start, mowing grass in our city parks. It's getting to be, we're in spring, although I'm told we might have 2 inches of snow tomorrow. Welcome to Toledo. But all else being equal, the temperature is about to start getting nice, and it's time to mow parks and vacant lots and all of the other properties that we're going to do that this weekend. We're not going to do that this weekend anymore. We can't. It's just the world has changed. Now we still will mow parks. And again, this is just one small example. We'll still do it. But Jesus, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that, when someone flips a switch and produces a $25 million hole in a budget that a month ago had a surplus, you're just not going to be able to provide any service as quickly and as efficiently as you wanted to. So we're not eliminating anything that we do. But let's be clear. The things that the services we will provide will probably be a little slower and less frequent than any one of us would want to be. And that's what we're going to have, that's a reality we're going to have to adjust to as we get through this difficult time that we're in. It's not going to be forever. We will get through this. That's why I do want to emphasize that these aren't layoffs. And the T in TEL stands for temporary, and that we are going to come to a world where we're going to sort of get back to normal. And I look forward to the day we can welcome these employees back. But the reality is, it's going to take a while to get there. You can turn off an economy with the flip of the switch. We just learned that. But you can't turn it back on by the flip of the switch. It's going to take a long time. And there are going to be expectations I think we all have. They're going to have to be readjusted as we move forward. So those are the end of my prepared remarks. It's a very tough day, but unfortunately a necessary day as we deal with something our country hasn't faced in at least 100 years. You have to go back to the Spanish flu of 1918 to have anything remotely resembling what's happening in this country right now. Again, we have Tom, Ty, and Katie available to answer any questions that you may have. Perhaps I would be able to answer your questions depending on what they may be, but they are a resource that you could take advantage of right now if you'd like to as well. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions. I know that there's a button, a raise hand button, I believe you might have access to. So if you could do that, we can get into questions.
Mayor, the first question comes from Sarah Elms of the Blade. Sarah?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Morning, Mayor. Can you explain a little further the difference between these TELs and furloughs, please?
It is, that's a really good question. And from the standpoint of general conversation, from the standpoint of how people use language, I'll be honest, there's probably not much of a difference between a TEL and a furlough. They're probably as close to a synonym as you would likely find. I do know, though, that there is a legal distinction. Again, the employees that we're talking about here have the benefit of being represented by a bargaining unit and a union, and I want to say right at the outset, we have had wonderful cooperation with our bargaining units. There are 9 bargaining units that represent the 2,700 employees in the city of Toledo. We've had nothing but good, healthy conversation and cooperation with all of them. This wouldn't be happening without their cooperation and their advocacy. In those contracts, in many of those contracts, there are issues pertaining to bumping rights and just a whole number of contractually negotiated realities that create a legal difference between a TEL and a furlough. That is a legal reality. But for this sense of general conversation, I won't disagree with the notion that effectively the two phrases are pretty close synonyms. So that's how I would address it. If I don't know if Ty or Katie wants to jump in on the legal, there is a legal difference. Fundamentally, it kind of seems like a synonym, and I get that. If someone else wants to jump in on that, you're welcome. That's how I would answer that.
No, Mayor, this is Katie. I think you answered it fine.
Okay.
Mayor, the next question comes from Bree Malaska of WNWL Channel 24. Bree?
Is she there?
Can you guys hear me now?
Oh, yes. Now I can. Yeah.
Good morning, Mayor. Sorry about that. So you said you were referencing the $25 million deficit. Is that what the city is currently at, or is that what you are projecting?
That is, look, and again, I'm glad Tom's here. Tom can walk this through with a little more minutia than I can. I will say this. Part of the real challenge we're dealing with here is that nobody really knows what's happening here. Let's be honest. Is the COVID-19 crisis something that is going to cause a painful, though relatively temporary, rough 4-month period, let's say? And then after those 4 or 5 months, we can get back to enjoying something resembling a robust, healthy economy? Is that what's going to happen here? Or are we at the beginning of that recession that we all knew was coming? Or heck, worse than that, there are some people worrying that we could be at the beginning of a depression. Nobody, literally, nobody knows that, what the reality is that our country faces. So what Tom has done, and working with City Council, he has established literally graphs that show curves and expectations based on every eventuality. There's a scenario where this is not, this is tough, but not, not as bad as it could be. And there are scenarios where it's as bad as you could imagine. Generally speaking, those range of options are somewhere between $25 to $50 million by the end of 2021. It is a smaller amount that we have to dig out of if you're talking merely about getting through 2020. That number could be closer to $10 or $15 million. So there's an immediate short-term getting through 2020 number, and then there's a more structural long-term number that we are guided based on algorithms and models that Tom has put together for us. But it's just a range, and we don't quite know where we're going to be, so we have to be conservative and make the tough decisions. And that's what today is all about. Tom, I don't know if you want to jump in if I explained that well or not. I know you could do it better. If you want to chime in, you're welcome, or not.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I endorse everything the mayor said, and certainly income tax being 70+% is a huge part of that. We are watching all the data, both in the media and in our books and in incoming mail to try to understand what the size, velocity, and duration of the income tax problem might be, and monitoring that. It's going to be challenging because information is difficult to come by with income tax payments being delayed till July 15th, but we're going to keep monitoring it. The rest of the revenue sources in the general fund are substantial in and of themselves and are also subject to volatility. There's casino revenue, and there's other revenue that's varied in nature. It's also going to take a hit. We have projections on all of those. But as the mayor mentioned, we're dealing with biology with regards to the virus and behaviors on a local, state, national, global level that impact us. And we're just doing our best to try to keep a range of potential outcomes in mind and to facilitate good decision making in real time.
Great. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Mayor, the next question comes from Sean Hegarty of WTVG Channel 13. Sean?
Mayor, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a little low, but I can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I'll speak up a little bit, sir. Are you close, or how close are you to any potential layoff of uniformed police and fire?
I would say right now we are not close. It is something that, frankly, we haven't even put on the table and considered. That's a policy decision. That's a value judgment. And the buck can stop with me. This is a decision that I feel is important. I believe that public safety is always a core function of government, and it's very base. Public safety may be the essence of local government, and so it's always important that we are strong when it comes to our police and fire departments. But in this particular unique case, it is even more important that we keep our numbers in police and fire strong, because those are the departments that are first responders, boots on the ground. They are the people who are at risk and putting themselves in a position to help us deal with the health realities that are going on in this country right now. So it is, I think if I've learned anything over the last month, is that you never know what tomorrow's going to bring, and things that you couldn't imagine, decisions you didn't even imagine making a month ago are now reality. So I guess I'll never say never, but it is something we've not discussed. Don't plan on re-engaging on that issue. It is a value of mine and a policy decision that we need to make sure we have a strong police and fire paramedic team going forward, given the unique health and safety risks we're facing. And if that upsets someone, then if it makes people feel better to blame someone, blame me. But that is what I believe, and that is the decision I've made.
Just if I could follow up there, do you recall from several years ago the phrase exigent circumstances? Do you think we'll be in that situation again?
I wasn't in city government then. I think you're talking about the Great Recession of 2009, 2010.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was on the county side then, so I wasn't a part of any of those discussions. I don't believe that is a reality that we are going to face at all. And the best example, the best reason that I can point to is the level of cooperation and the level of cooperation we've had getting to where we are with our bargaining units. Again, exigent circumstances to some extent signaled a fundamental breakdown between management and labor. I'm not, again, I wasn't here, not blaming anyone, but that's what exigent circumstances mean, is that management and labor can't do it. That's not been our experience here. We have gotten to where we are today working hand in hand with our bargaining units, and I do not anticipate at all that is going to change. Again, I've talked about several different exit ramps, if you will, that can guide us off, the road that we're on. And it's not a road you want to be on, this road of a budget deficit. Cutting expenditures is one exit ramp, and it's an important one, and it's what we're focusing on today. But there are other things that we can do. I talked about the budget stabilization fund, sometimes known as a rainy day fund. Again, we're going to have to work with council to figure out how we're going to address that. I will make the argument that if what is happening in the country right now is not rain, then I don't want to see the monsoon when it arrives. I think you can make a strong case that this is a time where we should tap into resources there to some extent. I think there's very likely to be a legislative change coming out of the State House within the next month that will give cities increased flexibility in purchasing bonds against future income tax collections for short-term needs. That's going to be an option. So there will be a time that we're going to talk through all this, and when we know every exit ramp that we're going to take, we're going to update you and everyone about it. The reason I feel so comfortable that we're not going to get to some of the real unfortunate fighting that happened 10 years ago was because we have a number of different paths that can get us through this. Cuts is one. There's no question. That's what we're doing today. But there's some other things that we can do, and we're going to do together that make me feel pretty comfortable that while this is going to be tough and tougher than any of us expected or wanted it to be, I think we're going to get through this without any of the nastiness that we saw 10 years ago. I believe that fundamentally.
Mayor, the next question is from Kayla Kirby of Channel 11. Kayla?
Hi, Mayor. Can you hear me? Good morning.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. You mentioned on the temporary emergency leave employees, it'll be evaluated every 30 days. Is there a potential that if this gets worse before 30 days, more employees could be cut, or are you sticking with the 326 until the 30 days are over and then recycle again?
I cannot imagine having to add additional employees to the TEL list before 30 days are up. I can't, again, I guess you never say never, but that's just much like cuts to the uniformed police and fire service are not even on the table. That too is not on the table. I think for the next 30 days, this is what we're looking at. And 30 days from now, we'll reevaluate and see where we are. Katie or Ty or Tom, if you want to chime in, and if you disagree, you're welcome to. But that's just not. That's just not going to happen. I think this is where we are for 30 days, and we'll reevaluate there. There's no additional TELs that'll be offered in those next 30 days.
Mayor, we have another question from Sarah Elms of the Blade.
Yep.
Sarah?
Hi, Mayor. It's a follow-up to that question, actually. How did you settle on the number of 326, please?
Yeah. I think, I'm going to, give the perspective maybe from 20,000 feet, but I think this is an area where Katie and Ty could really provide some insight. Essentially, what we did is we asked our directors to evaluate their operations and to provide us a recommendation on sort of a critical, non-critical designation. And then we as an administration reviewed what the department heads recommended, and then obviously made the final call. So I think that's important to note that this was not something done unilaterally, up in an ivory tower. These were decisions where the input of our sort of people who are delivering these services was valued. So, the director of DPU and the director of DPS and the fire chief and the police chief, we asked all of them to review their operations and give us a recommendation. Those recommendations, came into our office, say within the last 72 hours or so. We went through the list, reviewed it. We wanted to make sure, I know he's not on the call right now, but Matt Boaz from DNI, we wanted to make sure that these positions, 326 affected positions, did not unfairly focus on any one particular group of employee based on age or race or gender or any protected class. So we had Matt and his department review it to make sure that this was this process was done fairly in a way that's respectful to the diversity of our workforce. And so Matt did that, and we kind of went up through our chain of command, and I would say really within the last 24 hours, our team approved what our directors recommended, and we moved forward. Now again, that is my perspective on how we did this. Katie and Ty are more involved in the minutia and the specifics. So Katie, Ty, if I got that wrong, or if you can add anything to it, certainly feel free to do so. But that, generally speaking, is how we approach this.
I'm just going to add a few more comments. So when the mayor talked about the critical and non-critical employees, when we first, the first part of the process was beginning to determine what employees could work remotely. So we started with that list. And then as Tom Scribola began to look at our financials, he gave us a target number both for non-personnel and personnel costs that we needed to address. So we took that non-critical list and began to do an assessment of impact on operations and what employees would be best suited for TEL. The other thing that was really important to us as we went through this process is we wanted to make sure that employees were able to access the additional $600 in unemployment. We are trying to figure out, we want to make sure that this has the least amount of financial impact to employees. Of course, we can't completely take away that impact, but we also took that into consideration as well. So we did the non-critical list, looking at who could work remotely. The second thing is that Tom Scrigola gave us a target number for non-critical employees, and then we began to work through the list in that way to determine which had the least amount of impact to operations.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. Can you put a dollar amount at all to how much you think this will save in this first 30 days?
I have what I think might be an annual savings, but if you want to put it in monthly terms, Tom, how would you answer that?
Yes, over the month for the general fund, we would anticipate that. Let me pull that number up. We would anticipate that being about $600,000 for the general fund, and overall for the city, something in excess of $1.5 million for the entire city.
Right, because and that's right, and those numbers work out, but that larger number contemplates money being saved on SCM&R and utilities and all funds. We have said before, I believe publicly, in fact, I'm certain publicly, that this action on the general fund side is likely to save us somewhere, $5 to $7 million in the general fund. I think Tom's math on a monthly breakdown works out about right. So I think I was going to answer it on an annual term. He answered on a monthly term. I think the numbers are the same.
Okay, thank you. I asked monthly just because you said you'll reevaluate every 30 days. So.
Fair point.
Thanks.
Mayor, we have another question from Sean Hegarty of Channel 13. Sean?
Mayor, what's in the rainy day fund, and what is your process on, or your thought process at least, on possibly getting a hold of some of it?
I believe it's about $34 million, but fortunately Tom is here to make sure that my memory is consistent with facts. Tom, how much is in the budget stabilization fund?
Yes, our budget stabilization fund is estimated to end 2019 at roughly $35 million, and we've had actually a pretty good first quarter, so we expect that number to be pretty stable as of the beginning of this particular crisis.
It's inadvertently improving that I know my numbers. I thought Tom was going to have to bail me out, but I think I was right on. So that's the amount. The process that we would go through in this point very, very much involves City Council. This would, administrative decisions of the sort that we are announcing today under the strong mayor form of government are fundamentally decisions that we make, and of course we do it with input from a number of different stakeholders, but it's not something that required an ordinance. In other words, access to the budget stabilization fund, or some call it a rainy day fund, would be different in that would involve, if we get there, because theoretically we may decide to take nothing out of the rainy day fund. I'd be surprised if we took nothing, but it's possible. But if we do get to the point where the budget stabilization rainy day fund needs to be accessed, that would involve a vote of City Council and a public process and a public vote. The budget task force has phone calls regularly. We keep City Council updated. Council, though now digitally, virtually, has its meetings. They still have meetings, gender review meetings, council meetings. That is something that we will have to decide together, just as we would in a normal year. Just as we would in a normal year, we have to decide, whether we're going to tap into this fund or that fund. But ultimately, at the end of the day, access to that money would require an ordinance, and it would be something that council would participate in very, very publicly.
Mayor, we have one more question from Sarah Elms, again at the Blade. Sarah?
Hi, Mayor. Thanks again for your time. I'd like to ask a non-budget related question. I'm wondering if you have any reaction to all of the newly released numbers on coronavirus cases in long-term care facilities here in the community, and if you know of the strategy to keep these people living there and the employees safe at these facilities. It's a significant number.
Yeah, I'm aware of the numbers. I'm concerned, deeply concerned about it. You're talking about a population that is perhaps most vulnerable to this virus, and in a situation where they, are living together in a relatively confined space. It's just unfortunately a perfect breeding ground for this virus. So it's talking with the governor like we do every day. This is something that has been happening around the state with some frequency. There was a care facility in Dayton 2 weeks ago that had a huge spike. I want to say it was 30 or 40 in one day. Over in the Mahoning Valley, there was another example. I'm not surprised that something like this has happened in our community. given the nature of this. Not happy about it, of course. It's not a surprise. In terms of the response to it, I want to be, I think, as you know, Sarah knows and all the media knows, I am never short on opinions about anything, and I'm always willing to talk to the media at any time about any topic, truly. This one, I want to be careful not to kind of get out of my lane, and I want to, I guess, to the extent possible, defer to the health professionals on what the right response to this would be. Instinctively, I could think about different ideas around social distancing, but I would be comfortable. I'd be uncomfortable saying any more than that, just because I'm not a public health professional. Fortunately, we do have public health experts working on this, and I trust their judgment a lot better than I trust mine. So I guess that's how I'd answer that.
Okay, appreciate it.
All right, again, thank you to everyone, and let's just kind of, for your notes, let's just kind of pencil in Thursdays at 10 a.m. for this kind of weekly media briefing. But again, as you know, working with me here the last couple of years, things pop up, at any time on any issue, we'll set up a, one-on-one interview about any topic. So it's not like we're only going to be talking once a week, but I think at least once a week in this forum. But let's just plan to have these updates and go from there. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe and take care.